Okay. So can everyone hear me okay? I usually don't have a problem with that. So this is Think Like a Drupal Developer. The main goal here is really, in 50 minutes, I can't teach you to be a developer. I can't teach you to be a programmer. But most importantly, I want you to be able to think through a Drupal problem. It's very hard to learn the whole API. It's very hard to learn all of Drupal. But if you can think how to solve a problem, you can find the right answers. And that's really the most important thing. So first of all, who am I? I work for Acquia. I'm a technical consultant. I joined about a year and a half ago. I guess my math's right. I've had over 30 clients in 24 states in the last year and a half. Kind of what Ryan was saying in the earlier session. I've put in my 100,000 miles also in the year and a half. I'm working on, I think, 4 months in a row now on the road. So I see plenty of good, usually more bad, but plenty of good also. And my background is both from the system side and the application side, and it just kind of came together in what I do now. So who are you guys? How many of you guys would call yourselves programmers, developers, coders? So about 2/3 of you. How many of you guys are site builders or just looking to get into development? So I guess that looks like just about everyone else. How many of you guys would consider yourselves like novice to beginner Drupal? Okay, a little bit less. All right. So I assume the rest of you guys know everything. You don't need to be here, right? Okay. So sometimes you just have these little flashes of genius. I wrote this into my session description on the website, and I was like, this looks really great. Someone smarter must have written this, but apparently it came from me. I don't know. So Drupal is hard. It's not just CMS. It's not just framework. It has a power of both and the simplicity of neither. So it has a CMS, right? You install Drupal, you get the content types up and running, you create content. It's a framework. You can do all kinds of pre-built things like filtering content and permissions and everything that you can handle from the recording side. But where do you get started if you have both of these sides to it? So it's really important to know how Drupal works, and I'm sure you guys will figure this out throughout the rest of the day. But here's my short idea of how Drupal actually runs. First, you give it the URL, right? That's how you get to a website. That's how it works. It checks to see if there's a page already there. If not, it checks for permissions. Then it'll actually run the page and render it. Just very simple level. If this is how you think about how a Drupal page works, it'll help you understand where your answer is, where you're actually trying to solve a problem. Are you trying to stop someone from accessing something? You can see that goes in the menu system. Are you trying to just change how something gets displayed? You have to understand that happens last. Just a very high level understanding what's actually going on. Another important thing about understanding how to solve a Drupal problem is what is Drupal good at? What can Drupal do and what can't Drupal do? And by Drupal, I mean Drupal core, the main modules, the really important stuff. It's great at managing lots of structured data. The content types. It's great at understanding that thousands, hundreds of thousands, lots and lots of content. It's great at managing that. It's great at managing the access to it, the permissions, who can actually look at these things. Very, very fine-grained. It has an organized administration section. I didn't say easy. I didn't say user-friendly. I just said organized. And it gives themers a lot of options and layout and flexibility of what they want to do. There's some things it can't do very well, like external data. Web services, incoming, is not something that's really generic. If you want Twitter or Facebook, sure. If you need to integrate with some corporate system you guys have, you understand that's not something Drupal can do. Very simple data structures. Actually, commerce is a great example of that. It's commerce, all the line items, all the products, most of those don't need the whole nodes. They're not content types. They're just simple structures. So it's something they had to develop on top of Drupal. And also completely dynamic pages. I'm sure you guys have gone into plenty of client meetings and they go, well, on these 3 pages, I want it to look like this. And on these 3, I want this to happen. On these 3, I want this to happen. First of all, they're probably wrong, but to put it simply. But also, it's not something Drupal's great at. Drupal's great at organizing content and presenting it to you. It's not great at the arbitrary. It's not great at the use cases. These are where you guys need to step in and actually develop a solution. So I saw, I guess, about a third of you call yourselves builders. But really, we're all developers, right? There's the coding side, but the great thing about Drupal is you don't have to write code to really develop a site. You can make your views, your content types, your panels, all of that without writing a single line of code. And I'm sure that's why a lot of you are here, because you don't have to, you got sick of writing everything from scratch, and you said, well, Drupal saves me lots of times, and I get to enjoy my weekends, right? And really, the best Drupal developers are lazy. Not in the sense that lazy is good, right? No problem with lazy. It means you can rely on the community. It means you can take the solutions that are out there and make them fit what you need. It's not about writing a new module to do everything you need to do, or if a module doesn't quite fit what you need, you can make, you don't write something new, you make changes to it and keep moving, right? That's one great thing that Git's allowed us to do, is we can take a module that's out there, make the changes, and keep moving. Trust the community. I think views is at 200,000 sites or something. If that many people are using it, don't you think it's probably a good solution? You can be overly clever with Drupal. You can think the solution isn't exactly what you need, when in reality, it may just not be what you think at first. You may need to actually keep working through it and figure out that what you need to do is possible with what's out there. And I think the biggest kind of mantra I always try to push on people is rethinking the problems, not the solutions. So what I mean by that is, when you're thinking of the solutions, you're looking at the code you've written. You've looked at the site you've built, and you go, how do I improve this? Realistically, that's not the right place to go. The right place is, what was my original problem, and am I even looking at it the right way? And I have a couple examples at the end where I'll kind of mention that. So building and coding, just a couple of quick little examples. The learning curve is obviously a big difference. It's not a flat learning curve, but it's flatter for builders. It's all graphical. There's no big API to learn. It's a little more straightforward. Building and coding, also maintainability, I think, is the biggest one. If you're a contract and you go on site with a client for 3 months and you build them out a site, if you write them custom code, guess who they're going to call in 2 months when it breaks, right? They're going to call you on your weekend when you're on vacation. If you're using views or panels, they're not going to have that same expectation. They have an outlet to understand how to get that done. The customization's the fallback on that. If it needs to be so custom, code's usually the only way to get there. If it needs to be that different. And of course, book learning and blood, sweat, and tears, right? There's no easy way to learn coding in Drupal without just time. You have to put in the time. But with building, you can follow tutorials, you can see case studies, you can understand what other people did and actually understand what's happening. So a couple examples in the description, maybe you guys saw. There's probably 95% of Drupal coding is in 3 categories. There's a lot to learn, but you don't have to learn all of it. The first one's forms. So how many of you guys don't have a lot of PHP experience? Okay. There's 2 things you need to learn about PHP to work in Drupal, and that's arrays and then arrays. That's the number 1 and 2 and first 20 things you need to learn about Drupal is how to work with arrays in PHP. I'm sure all you guys know what hooks are, at least familiar, right? Okay, I'll assume. The great thing about forms is it doesn't matter if it's an administrative form or a content form or a web form or a poll or a search form or whatever. It's all built the same way. There's one system to learn. This is the absolute first place to start if you're becoming a Drupal developer. So best place to start. It's really the only place to start. Really simple examples, making fields required, changing the order of fields, adding help text. These are actually the things that I think when people build out a Drupal project, especially on the project manager side, the project planning side, they look at features and then they get to the end and they realize there's 20% of customizations they didn't budget for. Adding help text. Your company's not going to understand what a content type is. They probably have no idea what that term is, but maybe there's some term from a previous system that makes more sense. There's a lot of customizations you can do to just make the forms not just more usable, but local. That's why I like the term localization instead of internationalization. If you're a company, you have your sort of local lingo, right? Your local language, what people understand. You can customize it and put that into your Drupal site. There's no reason you couldn't have an English site and a Georgia Tech site that has Georgia Tech terms, Georgia Tech explanations for people to actually use. Second most important things are nodes. And there's two sides of this, right? There's the structure side, which is what the data is actually going to be, what you're actually looking at, and the presentation side, right? How many of you guys are themers or presentation side? Okay, good number. So what's the difference, right? Structure is when you're loading something, when you're looking at the data at the very first level. The presentation's at the very end of it. You never, ever alter the data at presentation. I'm sure coming from like MVC frameworks or other frameworks, you're like, oh, well, yeah, that's obvious, right? But on the presentation side, what you get into is, this is one of the biggest things I see clients do and do very wrong, is they alter data at the presentation, and then 2 months down the road, they implement something new and go, oh, wait, we have to figure out how to change it there too. And it just ends up being this constant cycle of figuring out where that piece of content exists on the site and just knocking them out one by one. It's really inefficient, and that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I see people make in theming, is they think theming is where you change the content, where you reformat it. If you change it at the structural side when it's loaded, you never have to think about it again. It's just different. You don't have to find those use cases. You don't have to find all those other places it's being used. You just run with it. So, and then menus is probably the third part that I think is a great starting point. When you think of menu in other systems, right, you think of navigation bar, right? When you guys first started with Drupal, how many of you guys saw menu? Okay, well, those are things I click on, right? You don't have to be ashamed. That's what most people think. In Drupal, it runs everything. I mean, it's not just links, it's not just URLs, it's permissions, it's what do you call when you actually want to look at a page, it's who can see it, it's how to load stuff out of the URL. I mean, like you guys see, like, node / a node number, right? That's actually calling node load just based on the URL. There's a lot of stuff happening in the menu system that I think most people don't realize, and guess what? It's all arrays. So you can do all kinds of different things here with changing titles, permissions, where things are actually being called. Everyone knows like the content overview page. It's just real simple. It allows you to pick a content type. No one ever uses that. Everyone always replaces it, right? What a lot of people do is they put it at some other URL and add a link. Why not just override what's already there? Go ahead and change what exists and keep moving and never let people see the old one. There's no harm in doing that. And it's very efficient. So this is something where if you need to do really weird stuff with a menu, you can make it as inefficient as you want. There's no harm in doing that because it's only going to change maybe daily whenever you clear the cache. So, just you can do whatever you need to do with the menu system, and you don't have to worry about it being really, really fast. So then you come to, okay, great, these are some great examples of coding. I know why I would build, views, why I would use content types, panels, right? So you don't want to have to code all that. They're great for user tools or user interface tools. But there's some cases where there's actually multiple ways to do it. And just, again, a couple more examples. So everyone knows views, right? Everyone's probably first module they throw on a site. Graphical setup, community driven, it's the biggest community module out there, built-in caching, display options, you can make lists, tables, slideshows, carousels, RSS feeds, whatever you want, just clicking through it. And really, if you actually kind of step back from views and look at it, it's a prototyping tool, right? It gets you all the way to where you need to be, data-wise, permissions-wise, filtering, and then it says, okay, well, how do you want to display it, right? It's at a really low level, it's a really high level, it's prototyping. It's just getting you to a certain point. Drupal 7 has a cool new tool called Entity Field Query. This allows you to write NoSQL. Remember in Drupal 7, you can't assume things are in SQL anymore. So what any field query does is it allows you to say, I want a node that has a field with this value. You don't have to worry about table names. You don't have to worry about indexes and all that stuff. All you have to worry about is the field name and the value, and you're done. Why would you do this? It has low overhead, right? Views, it has to go from this graphical settings into SQL queries, into results, from those results into display. There's a lot of stuff going on. But Entity Field Query, it basically just generates a SQL and gets you those results back. It's a lot more efficient. It's a lot less overhead. But you still don't have to know SQL. And I think this is one of the biggest reasons why this is cool. Is before, I mean, you guys probably saw the SQL queries that Views puts out and trying to get values out of CCK fields in Drupal 6, and it was just a horrible, horrible mess. But now you no longer have to even touch SQL. And if you combine it with, there's a module called Entity Load Cache, you have caching there as well. So you can see both of these will end up with your slideshow. They'll end up with your carousel, your list, your table. But there's just two very different ways to do it. You know, there's certain things Views is not very good at or not very clear about is, what if you want 2 degrees of relationships? You know, you technically can do it, but it's kind of confusing through the interface. So Entity Field Query sometimes makes that easier. Contextual changes. I couldn't think of a better word, so context module, right? Why would you use that, right? It's flexible API, everyone uses it. It's easily exportable to code, so it's deployable, it's maintainable, and it is extendable by non-coders, right? A great example is like mobile tools. You know, if it's mobile, you can show different blocks or switch theme or do all kinds of other stuff with context. But what if you want to do something completely custom? You can use like hook boot, hook init. The problem there is it's very, very performance focused. It's going to call on every page load. I've seen people put web service calls in hook boot and hook init. Guess what? Every page load is going to be 5 or 10 seconds. You have to be really careful here. But it also can handle the same type of conditions and reactions context does. It's the same similar thing. A great example of where context makes more sense is something like mobile tools, or something like you know, showing blocks for certain content types, showing promotions for different taxonomy terms, right? But something like single sign-on, how do you explain that in context? You know, you can't explain someone's logged in or someone has a cookie or someone needs to be passed to my internal system. It doesn't make sense, right? But you're really solving the same problem, and that's really what's the important thing to understand is what is the problem I'm solving, and then figure out where it belongs. Way too many people jump into it and start coding, just kind of go for it. And Drupal, that can get you in trouble really quickly. So I want to jump straight into examples. If you guys have any really good examples, like I had a client that wanted to do X and I didn't know how to do it. These are kind of things I want to talk about this. I mean, these are what you guys are coming across. I see a lot of clients. I don't see all clients, obviously. So these are just some things that I've come across. So anytime an anonymous user sees a news article, show them a subscription link and a pop-up, right? Everyone finds these really obnoxious. What New York Times does it, a lot of magazines, newspapers do it. You know, what's a couple wrong ways to do it? Putting it in the theme. That's one of the worst things you can do for something like this. It works. There's no problem with it, right? The problem is a site redesigns every, let's say, 2 to 3 years, right? They change drastically how it looks, color schemes, layouts. That's just a natural part of a website. They only change CMSs every 5 to 10 years. And in some cases, I've seen actually longer than 10 years, which is kind of terrifying. But the point is, you don't want to put this kind of functional code into something that's disposable. A theme is disposable. You know, trends happen, colors happen, resolutions change, mobile sites appear. You know, you can't put functional code that's going to last forever in something you're going to throw away in a couple years. It just doesn't make sense. But then this is a great example where there's actually 2 good ways to do it. You can create that in context. So you could actually create a reaction that pops this thing up, right? Why wouldn't you use hook boot? So hook boot runs even on a cache page. Problem is, what if you're caching at Akamai What if you're caching somewhere else? It'll never get run. Or worst case, you can't change it because it is being cached somewhere else. So again, where do you solve this problem is just as important as what the actual solution is. Another right way to do it, Drupal tells you if they're logged in. Why complicate it? Just do it at JavaScript level. There's a lot of ways to solve these kinds of problems. This one I've seen, again, I'm not sure why you would use taxonomy for permissions, but hey, people do it. And this is a great one I actually came across a couple weeks ago that I didn't have a good answer right away. I thought, I went through all kinds of different options. In Drupal 7, node access is really easy. You can just return whether you want to let them have access or not let them have access. When you actually dive into it, you realize that doesn't affect the menu. So it doesn't work. What if you override the access callback for all nodes? That's just inefficient, right? What if you want to change just 5 pieces of content, but it has to pass through yours to get through the main access? That also doesn't make sense. Returning access denied. What you're doing here is you're telling Drupal to load all the way up until it gets to the very end of loading the node and printing it out. And then you say, no, that's not what I want to do. Go back. Tell them they can't do that. It doesn't make sense. This is why it's important to understand how a page loads in Drupal to know how efficiency actually works. You need to stop it at the highest point. The right way is another hook. There's node access, which doesn't work in the menu. There's node access records that does. It's just something, this is actually, I think, my exact thought progression that went through this. So I said, that doesn't affect the menu. They can't see it in the menu. Why would they see the title? And also node access, I don't think fits into views either. So, there's a lot of things there's a lot of steps you go through until you realize this isn't the right thing to do. And I didn't implement node access and realize it didn't work. I didn't change the access callbacks and go all the way and figure out it didn't work. You have to think through these problems and actually architect it before you even build it. And if I had gone through 3 wrong ways and then the right way, that would have taken me a week, week and a half. But instead it takes 2 days just because you spent that first day thinking this won't work, this will work, this won't work. What are the exceptions? What are the race conditions, use cases, all that stuff. That's the smart way to develop. And realistically, it's a lazy way because you're not sitting in front of a computer screen coding all day. You're in front of a whiteboard, which I thought was great. There's a quaint little whiteboard on this huge auditorium. But, I want all checkboxes to be those cool image buttons instead of normal checkboxes. People love that, right? I can't think of a mainstream site that does it, but a lot of sites do it. Wrong ways. CSS and JavaScript to change what it looks like. Why is that wrong? Does it belong there? It's not, you're not actually changing, it's not something you're just changing the styling of. It's something that's structurally different. It's different HTML. You can do that in JavaScript, but do you really want your JavaScript rewriting your page while it's loading? Try troubleshooting that. It's not going to be easy. Another wrong way, there's form elements that you can go through all the different theme functions and change them all to some new little function you've created. Why not just change the theme function? Again, understanding in Drupal, there's forms. That's the first thing you're going to learn. Don't always try to attack it from that way. Try to learn the best way to do it. This is a good one that I see on any big corporate site. There's always that corporate masthead, right? You have no idea if it's a Drupal site or an Alfresco site or a Vignette site or whatever system they're using. They always want that exact same masthead in a Drupal site. I'm going to assume you're not using an iframe for that. So I've seen hard coding in a file. How many systems do they have in their company that they have to change every time they want to change something in there? That's not going to work. I've seen it before. I've seen clients actually copy and paste from their company site and put it into Drupal. I've seen people try to recreate the whole thing with Drupal. Again, what if one link changes, or what if you need to change one thing in there? The right way, again, there's a couple right ways to do it. You can create JavaScript to do it, just like you would like Facebook social plugins. Just a little JavaScript snippet. It just appears somewhere on the page. Using a web service to get it back and cache it. There's all kinds of different ways to understand how these questions actually get answered. But I kind of want to go back to, I want to go back to this. I mean, through those examples, you can see there's a lot of different ways to do stuff, but Drupal is not designed out of the box for going and pulling some company masthead. If you can just go through a project plan, through your tasks, through your issue queue, however you manage that stuff internally, how are you actually going to solve those problems and what Drupal can solve for you and what you need to code? And if you can just immediately go through there and strike off what's not relevant and focus on what needs to be coded, then that's where you can actually jump in and really get started. So how many of you guys would actually say, based on maintainability, how many of you guys would say it's easier to maintain clicking through a Drupal site versus code? For the Drupal building, how many of you guys would say the visual side of it's actually easier to maintain? Really? So the rest of you guys think code's easier to maintain? I guess that shows the crew here. Really? Why would you say that?
Well, I mean, you can export out features and maintain it that way. Sometimes when you have to change something through the building process, it takes a bit longer to take care of, especially if you're doing coding.
Right. What if you have a mixed audience? How do you manage the maintainability of builders and coders?
Oh, like I said, that's why it's coming.
Right. So there's no right answer to any of these things. I mean, the big thing is you come across all these different solutions in Drupal and you realize, yeah, you have features, right? You can take all that work those, I guess, quarter of you, their builders did, put it into code and put it into a normal code workflow that makes sense. But if you have coders that are writing everything, they're just going to think about it a different way, which is why, again, this is called think like a Drupal developer, not like a coder, not like a builder, not like a programmer. We're all developers. We're all developing sites in whatever capacity that is, depending on if it's your client, your product, your company, whoever you're actually building it for. So I wanted to leave some time for you guys to kind of almost, I mean, I'm glad we have the Ask the Expert section we have outside. But I'd really like to kind of think through a couple scenarios you guys have had. How many of you guys are working on a project right now that, okay, if you guys don't all raise your hand, I'll start questioning. But how many of you guys are working on a project right now that's not going to plan? Some of you guys are really good. Wow, you guys are cute. Is it that bad? So I mean, what are some scenarios you guys are running into? What is, especially for you newer guys, coming into Drupal, what was that first thing you built that you realized, oh wow, Drupal's not as easy as I thought?
Commerce address book.
Commerce address book? You can ask Ryan that, I'll leave. I mean, what are some of the things you guys came across that kind of stumped you at first? Taxonomy. In what way? I think that's a great example.
Well, if you look at information, you've got a role-based activity so that as you log in, right, you're allocated to a set of roles, right? But you have taxonomy that also flows into that as well, which then you can more granular level the control over who sees what on the side, who sees what on the side. And just coming into that more granular level of control over the learning rate.
Right. So just to make sure everyone can hear, dealing with taxonomy and permissions, right? I think the biggest thing that I'm actually glad you brought up taxonomy because that's one a lot of people struggle with is, why would you use a content type? Because it has workflow, because you can publish it, because it knows who wrote it. You use taxonomy when you don't need any of that, when you're just categorizing content. If you're organizing content based on the taxonomy and permissions, that's, again, it's not a natural fit for Drupal. Drupal thinks of taxonomy as, think the best example is like a newspaper, right? Does this have to do with local news, what state does it have to deal with? Is it crime or education or whatever topic it is? And then when you start thinking about it, you go, okay, well, I need certain people to edit this and certain people to edit this, right? I assume that's where you're kind of going. That's where like Workbench came from. Is in Drupal 6 you had workflow, taxonomy, access control, TACLite, all these different things that you had to plug in together. And Workbench, they rethought the problem, right? They no longer said, all right, taxonomy terms are just for organizing. They said that's also how we create sections for a site. That's how we actually organize this stuff. That's how we actually keep moving. And they started over. That's why I think one reason why workflow hasn't come to Drupal 7 is they rethought the problem. They said, this is such a common use case that we're no longer going to rely on these 4 modules to solve the problem. We're just going to rethink it. And I think Commerce, Drupal Commerce is another perfect example of that. UberCart was built to be this sort of monolithic single solution that you install and get running. And Commerce, they stepped back and said, this is not the right way to do it. Everyone has a different shopping cart system. Everyone has a different credit card processor. We can't accommodate all these, so we'll just accommodate none of them. They solved the solution by just making the problem simpler. They rethought how to actually create a commerce solution for Drupal instead of just relying on the status quo and improving what was already there. What are some other questions, some things you guys ran into? Taxonomy, commerce address books, a little more specific than I thought. But what are some other things you guys ran into? What are some of the things that you guys really spent a lot of time thinking through and understanding about Drupal?
Several consider around hook form alter and node API. There's a couple different options of how you can append data to the node and things. I definitely spend a lot of time looking at, debugging node API, trying to figure out what was happening when and where, and what I might do on, offering the form up front versus node API.
Right, so that's a great example of the 2 different ways to manage a node, right? You can do the form alter at the beginning and make sure it just gets saved a certain way, and then it's always there forever and ever. If you wait until like Node API, and I assume you're using like View or Load or something like that, when you get to that point, you have to start wondering, are they doing a full node load? In some places, they actually don't. If it's something that you're just setting the title of the node, do you really want to do that every time it's loaded? That's not a customization anymore. If it's always set, you're not customizing it, you're just setting it. So form alter, if you think about how it's being saved, you have to manage it at that level. You always want to look at how things diverge in the site. Everyone always looks at kind of the tree diagram to understand, right? You always want to figure out the least number of branches to cut off. You want to figure out the fastest way to do it. And if you change at the form level, it just saves right there, right? It's 1 branch to cut, or 1 trunk to cut, I guess, at that point. But if you start having to figure out where those nodes are being used in all those different places, you're going to spend all day cutting down every branch of that tree instead of just cutting it down as low as you can. It's a different way to solve the problem. So I think I saw a hand in there. What are some other things? These are great. I think everyone's here because they want to know how to be a better Drupal developer, right? Exposure, right? Experience, use, hearing, I think, from other people and solving these problems. Yeah.
So I have to, that's when I realized that I was looking for the
Right, exactly. So the example is basically using data in views that kind of is a natural fit for views. when you're doing views, first you put it in preprocessed node, right? You're thinking, okay, it's just how it's displaying the node. Let me change that. And you realize, okay, views doesn't care. And then you do preprocessed views, and you go, okay, well, it's doing that for the view, but now I also need to do it when I'm just looking at the node, or when it's in an RSS feed, or everywhere else it's being displayed. So you can go one level higher up than that and say, when the node's being loaded, put some other field in there, right? But you still have to manage where all that's being used. If you go all the way down, you can actually just change the URL that any node points to. Again, it's all about kind of going all the way down that tree. Actually, the example I had was taxonomy terms. So they had a link that linked externally. The entity system in Drupal 7, you can change where anything links to all the way at the base level, and everything will respect that. So it's not really display setting at that point, right? It's not coloring or sizing or arrangement. It's actually how your site functions. So you start looking farther down, you go, template, you go back to your node API, your node hooks, you go, okay, that doesn't cover everything, and you just keep drilling down. And that's where I think the API is so beneficial, just taking the time and clicking through. I mean, if you click through enough, you see, okay, at this base level, it's looking for this function called node URI. That's the link to any node in Drupal. Change it. Just change it in that one place, and it's changed everywhere you can possibly think of. It's all about thinking lower in the problem. You up there? Yeah, so actually, I think when I was explaining taxonomy is actually a great way to think about it, is when you're looking at nodes, you want workflow, you want publishing, you want author information, you want all kinds of fields. You want to be able to manage this content as if it's a single piece of content that people can actually work on and change. When you're looking at taxonomy, it's just a word with some information on it. So the core thing, especially in Drupal 7, I think you've seen a lot of people getting confused about thinking through a problem. They'll think, okay, well, taxonomy terms can have fields, so I can just use taxonomy terms and nodes for the same thing. But nodes specifically are all about workflow and this audit trail of how they were changed and where they're being used. And you get into a lot of situations where you'll create a taxonomy term 2 months later and realize, oh wait, I don't want all these published. And you have to completely re-architect it to become a node. And once that becomes a node, now you have all these other options, but you do have that overhead. You do have that overhead of all those node hooks, all those different things you can change throughout the whole process. So it's really key to understand node and taxonomy, not just from the level of what's the book definition, but also once I get to the end of a site and it's actually there and I need to maintain it, am I ever going to need it to be unpublished? Am I ever going to need to hide it? Taxonomy is not possible. Node, you can do it at all kinds of different levels. One kind of in-between example is the commerce line items. They're really small data structures. There's not a lot there, but by the time you're actually using them, you realize, okay, I'm using this all over the site, and you don't really know what that next step is, but you've kind of created this separate little area for it to go. So I know that's kind of around your question, but I think the nodes it's more important to know why you would use a node rather than what it is. Because by the time you build out the site, it is whatever you wanted it to be. So I really, these are kind of things I think that the building, especially this early in the morning, I didn't want to be too technical immediately. I'm sure a lot of you guys from out of town are still struggling getting up. But these are the kind of things that it's really important to understand. I think the mantra of rethinking the problem, not the solution. If you guys take away nothing else from this, just kind of think through that as you're actually building sites. Clients are going to give you, I need this, this, and this. They're not going to be the ones telling you, maybe you don't need this. Sometimes the best thing you can be for a client is be the devil's advocate. Help them understand what the problem really is before they just start throwing out slideshows and Flash and all kinds of other solutions to the problem. maybe they don't even know what their problem is. So anything else? I mean, anything else you guys have come through?
I got to follow up on mine.
Yeah.
What are some good resources for understanding the order that books fire and the way the how everything really fires in Drupal, so that you can pick that right place?
Well, I think the API is a great place to start. I mean, the API is extremely well documented. It actually does explain what fires when and where. The better answer to that is if you have 5-6 hours, you can just sit there and debug every function in Drupal. And I mean, realistically, I think any Drupal developer, that's something you need to do once. You need to understand if I'm on a simple node page, the menu system gets fired, and then permissions get fired, and then the page callback gets fired, and node load gets fired, and all these things, just what that order is, you do it once, and that 5 hours of pain becomes inspiration for all the other development you do. So I think there's actually, the last session of the day, there's one on debugging. I think that's one of the least used skills that most Drupal developers have. I mean, I think it's more people need to understand what debugging is to understand how Drupal really thinks, not just my little, 5-step guide to how Drupal works, because let's be honest, I'm leaving out a little bit in there. But if you run through that once and you go, oh, okay, well, I didn't realize form alter ran before form ID alter. I didn't know that. You do it once, you solve that problem. I forget where I saw this. I saw it sometime this week, but the idea that that good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So you have to make those mistakes. You have to, I'm sure you spent a lot of time going, why isn't this working? Why is it being changed after the fact? You need to have that bad moment to understand later on why this changed. And, going through the debugger and understanding what this order is could be that bad judgment of spending an afternoon doing that. But you gain tons of experience in understanding how Drupal actually works from that. And, there's documentation, but realistically, like I said, with the learning curve, you have to put in that time. You have to understand how Drupal works and how to massage Drupal, not, how to break Drupal and put your code in there. So, anything else? I think I'm just about time. Any other questions? I think I was actually in this exact room, in this exact session last year. And I think this is really kind of I kind of relish this kind of session to present on, because it's your first session of the day. It's the first session you guys see. I want you guys to think about these as you go to your view sessions, your panel sessions, your theming sessions, of how do you actually solve these problems. And I'll be around all day. Pull me aside, say I just went to the session on views and I see how views fits this way, but what if I want to change this? I want you guys to be thinking about this all day. This is not a 50-minute session. This is a introduction to the day, really, of being a developer. So anytime you guys see me out there and you have a question, please, grab me, ask a question. I'd prefer not to be cornered, but if that's what it takes, I'll answer your questions, I promise. So, after today, I have too many slides. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter. Really, any questions you have, if I don't have the answer, I'll point it to you. If it's a long question, I'll point you to something else. But, feel free to kind of keep in touch, definitely. And, I come to some of the Atlanta meetups, but I've presented in 6 or 7 states this year. So, if you don't see me here, you'll probably see me in Florida or California or Pennsylvania or New York or somewhere else. Sorry. So, any last second questions or? Okay. What? As specific as you want. Not right now, maybe, but yeah, just come ask me after. But so, thanks everyone. Go Jackets. Yeah.